Hello and welcome to Animal Rights, the Abolitionist Approach Commentary. This is Gary Francione. Well, this is our 23rd No Frills, No Bells, No Whistles commentary concerning the abolition of animal exploitation, the failure of animal welfare reform, veganism as the baseline of the animal rights movement, and creative, nonviolent vegan advocacy as the primary form of animal rights activism, and the principle of ahimsa or nonviolence and its role in all of our advocacy efforts. Well, in this 23rd commentary, we're going to have a guest, Professor Robert Garner of the University of Leicester, who will be talking with me about our new book, The Animal Rights Debate, Abolition or Regulation. This is a fairly lengthy commentary, and so without further ado, I will turn to the interview with Professor Garner. Okay, in this commentary, I have with me Professor Robert Garner, who's at the University of Leicester and the Department of Politics. Are you still chairperson of the department?
No.
Good for you. that curse has passed to someone else. And Professor Garner and I co-authored the book, The Animal Rights Debate, Abolition or Regulation, which was published in November by Columbia University Press. And in the book, we're both rights advocates in the sense that unlike many other theorists, Professor Garner does not adopt a consequential or a wholly consequentialist position. He has a deontological notion of rights in his position, but where we differ is I maintain that sentient beings have a right not to be used, that we have an obligation not to treat them as resources, however humanely we treat them, whereas Professor Garner takes the position that animals have a right not to suffer unacceptably. But he doesn't agree that on the issue of use. So, in this commentary, I have asked Professor Garner to come on and discuss with me a couple of the issues that we discuss in the book. And the book, by the way, you can get at your bookstore or you can get it online. I have been informed by Columbia that although the book sold out in, I guess by the beginning of December, the run which had been printed in late October sold out in November, and but now there are more books available, so you can get the book. Welcome to the Abolitionist Approach Commentary, Professor Garner.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, Gary.
My pleasure, Robert. Robert, in the book, one of our points of central disagreement is we both advocate rights, but we advocate different rights. And you advocate the right not to suffer unacceptably. And one of the things we discuss in the book is, what does it mean to say to suffer unacceptably? Could you clarify what you think about that and what you mean by a right not to suffer unacceptably?
Yeah, sure. I should preface that perhaps by saying that my position is a little bit more nuanced than that, and maybe that will come out in our discussion. But in general terms, I'm saying that domesticated animals at least have a right not to suffer at the hands of humans. Now, obviously, a pain-free or boredom-free or anxiety-free existence is not always possible. But I would think that anything but minor levels of suffering would be unacceptable, according to my position. I'm not a biologist or an animal welfare scientist, and so I can't provide a definitive answer as to what a minor level of suffering would be. But I think, as a general point, it would rule out factory farming and most invasive forms of animal experimentation.
But it's basically it's a balancing test, as it were, isn't it? I mean, doesn't it sort of get us back to sort of the utilitarian balancing test of I mean, obviously, any level of suffering is unacceptable to the animal. So the question becomes, what is unacceptable to us, right? And so doesn't it get us back to that balancing test, or to a balancing test?
No, because it's a different position from an animal welfare position, which would hold that any form of suffering is permissible, providing that human benefits accrue from it. My position would be that in as far as any particular way of treating animals causes suffering, then that becomes ought to be prohibited on the grounds that animals have a right not to suffer. So it doesn't involve a balancing act at all in that sense. And I think that I know that you raised issues about how you define what particular levels of suffering are going to be acceptable. I don't think it's unusual for rights, for particular rights, to be short of content in that sense. I mean, if you take, for instance, a right not to suffer, which is regarded as one of the key liberal rights, then that opens all kinds of questions about the degree to which it includes the right, for instance, to say anything you like about religion or race and so forth. So establishing a right to free speech, for instance, would then is the start of the process. But in order to implement it, you have to provide a lot of detail.
But I agree with you that rights aren't absolute, and that in many cases where rights conflict, there has to be a balancing of interests, or at least, I mean, I guess you could say one has to assess the strength of the competing rights, and what that does, I think, I mean, your example is a good one, the right of free speech, right? So you say, well, I have a right of free speech, fine. But now, do I have a right to yell fire in a crowded movie theater? No, I don't. But is that a matter of balancing? I would say in that situation, it's not, because the reason why you have a right of free speech is because we want you to contribute to the marketplace of ideas and to public discourse, and we want there to be a vibrant public discourse. But yelling fire in a crowded movie theater when there is no fire, obviously, if there's a fire, then it's a good thing to yell out. But if there's not a fire, then you're not really contributing to the marketplace of ideas. What you're doing is you're putting something patently false into the marketplace of ideas, which instead of invigorating public discourse, is going to cause injury and panic, etc. So there are situations in which rights can arguably conflict, or which they ostensibly conflict, where when we look into the nature of the rights, we see that really they don't conflict at all, because the ostensible conflict actually causes us to focus on what the scope of the right is. But there may be situations in which rights really conflict, and in order for us to determine the scope of competing rights, we have to assess relative interests. I agree with that. But when we talk about the right of an animal, which is our property, because that's the only relationship we have with them, a right not to suffer unacceptably. From the point of view of the animal, any suffering is not acceptable, is not desirable, not desired or desirable. And so doesn't it really get back to what level of suffering is acceptable given the benefit we want to get? So I agree with you. I'm not trying to attribute to you a sort of a classical welfarist balancing act, but it's something similar. I mean, it's a more progressive version, a much more progressive version of the welfarist balancing act, isn't it? Because what you're doing is trying to assess our interest in using our animal property when the animal has an interest in not being used, and so the question becomes, what's the strength of our benefit? What's the strength of the benefit we're getting? So doesn't it get back to a progressive version of that balancing act?
No, because I think the bottom line is that the right not to suffer can't be traded off against other human benefits that might be produced by causing animals to suffer. So that the issue of property, I think, although obviously it's important and it's central to your argument, and no doubt we'll come to it, I think the idea of property here can be dispensed with, in the sense that we're dealing in the abstract with the notion of a right. And to me it seems that a right not to suffer cannot be traded off against a human benefit that might accrue from it. So we're quibbling about what a minor level of suffering might be, and of course, that evolutionary biologists would tell us that some levels of suffering might have an important function in terms of warning an animal or a non-human animal or human of dangers that might be faced. So I am saying that this right not to suffer cannot be traded off against any human benefit, and that's the bottom line, and that makes it very different, I think, from an animal welfare position, which would allow humans to exploit animals and cause animals to suffer for any significant benefit. My position would rule that out.
All right. Well, let me. I think the second question. Let's try to make it more concrete. I'm talking with Professor Robert Garner of the University of Leicester. Professor Garner is a political theorist, and we co-authored the Animal Rights Debate, Abolition or Regulation, published by Columbia University Press in November of 2011. And we're talking today about some of the themes of that book. All right. Well, let me ask you a specific example. I'm reading from the list of questions that I suggested we focus on. So, although you think factory farming cannot be morally justified, if animals could be raised in a pleasant way with minimal suffering and killed in a relatively painless way for food, or if animals could be used in experiments with minimal suffering and significant benefits for humans, you could not object, could you? And then I said, let's take a very clear example. I have a cow who lives in the back garden. I treat her very well. I shoot her. One bullet, instantaneous death. She doesn't feel anything. Didn't know what hit her. Kill her and I eat her. Have I done anything morally wrong? Let's take that as a hypothetical. Have I done anything wrong? If I have this cow in my back garden, I treat her really, really well. I shoot her. She doesn't feel anything. One bullet. I do it correctly, and I eat her. Have I done anything morally wrong?
Yes. To cut the long story short, this allows me really to develop the nuances in the argument that perhaps that's difficult to articulate from simply talking about the right not to suffer. Of course, this is an extremely complex moral question, and I think we simplify it at our peril. At least that's what I tell my students anyway. I think I'll start by making two general points. One is that the first point I would make is to say that I wouldn't want to say that all uses of animals are necessarily wrong, and that distinguishes your position from mine. And secondly, this conclusion is based on the view that I don't think that the possession of rights is an all or nothing affair. So according to an interest-based theory of rights are allocated according to the degree in which they protect important interests. So we wouldn't want to say, for instance, that animals have a right to vote, since clearly this wouldn't protect any important interests that animals have.
That's actually an example I use, but I actually think that if we gave them a right to vote, we'd probably have, in both of our political systems, better results. Go ahead, sorry.
Yes, I mean, on that point, I think animal interests could be represented in the political system, and I think that's an important point. The idea of representing the interests of animals on the lines that we represent the interests of future generations is an important argument, which not a great deal of work's been done on, actually.
Actually, I was just making sure.
I know you were making
the less useful comment of saying, let's let them vote and we'll have better political leaders.
Yes. I've recently been rereading James Rachel's on this, his book, Created from Animals.
Yes.
Which was written now 20 years ago, believe it or not.
Did you ever meet James Rachel's?
No, I didn't.
I actually, just as an aside, he was an absolutely wonderful man. He passed away a few years ago, and I had the pleasure of meeting him. He had he did a conference. My recollection is it was at the University of Richmond. I believe that's where it was, although I may be wrong about this, but I believe it was the University of Richmond. But in any event, he sponsored a conference, and he had me come and speak, and he was, I think Created from Animals is a great book, and he was a terrific philosopher. But I'm sorry, go ahead. You were saying you were reading Created from Animals?
Yeah, well, what he argues is, he criticizes philosophers such as Kant and Robert Nozick for attempting to identify one difference between humans and non-humans that's relevant to justifying all differences in the way they're treated, and that difference, as you know, is usually said to be human autonomy or self-consciousness or moral agency or some such concept. But as he points out, this isn't right, because the characteristics that are relevant to justifying treatments vary with the different kinds of treatments you're talking about. So if you say comparing, I think the example he gives is comparing admission to universities and torture. Now, clearly, an animal's inability to read and write would mean that it would be ridiculous to give animals a right to university education. There's a joke there. I think we could tell quite anyway. But of course, in the case of in the case of torture, it's the capacity for suffering that's crucial. So it has nothing to do with human autonomy or moral agency and so forth. So in terms of the interest that animals have, we could include an interest in, say, life, liberty, and well-being. But I would say that animals clearly have an interest in not suffering, and this interest in not suffering is, all things being equal, is equivalent to a human's interest in not suffering. So the bottom line is, for me, that animals clearly have a right not to have suffering inflicted upon them by humans. At least they do if we say that humans have such a right. So it's clearly the case that those human uses of animals that cause suffering are illegitimate morally. So that's the position that I described earlier. Now, I think, as I said in the book, I think applying this ethic would remove a great deal of what troubles people about our treatment of animals. And this is clearly a much more far-reaching principle than an animal welfare ethic. But I'm not denying, and this is a key point really, I'm not denying that animals also have an interest in continued life. What I do think, however, for perhaps the reasons that I'll explore in the answer to the next question, is that this interest is inferior to the interest in continued life that normal adult humans have. So even if we say that animals have a right to life, I think this right can be overridden by a human's right to life. But this is a crucial bit in answer to your question, since animals do have an interest in continued life, we shouldn't take their lives with impunity. Indeed, I'm inclined to think that animal lives should only be sacrificed if by so doing the lives of humans are protected. So, to cut a long story short, I wouldn't regard the humane killing of a cow in my back garden as acceptable morally, unless I was starving, and without eating the cow, without killing and eating the cow, I would die of starvation. So that points out the nuances in my argument.
But wait a minute, but how do you get there though? If you don't believe, if you think that the interest in not suffering is protected by a right, I thought the central disagreement between us in the book was that you didn't think that there was a question about whether an animal had an interest in continued living. That there was a question about that you weren't clear on that one way or another, but that you didn't think that we could talk about the right of an animal not to be used at all. Because if what you're saying is that I can't kill, because if you're saying that it's not just factory farming that's the problem, because that was the position that I thought you took in the book, is that you had to rule out factory farming, but that it would not necessarily rule out all uses of animals for food, because if the right not to suffer was not violated, then the right there was no right not to be used. Because if we agree that there's a right not to be used, then we agree completely on everything.
No, because I
now all the animal groups are going to start having problems with you too. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah, that we should stop now. I think. No, I don't think that you can talk about an animal's right not to be used as a kind of absolute principle which can't be qualified. But I do say, and I do qualify. I don't say in the book that animals have no interest in life. I just take the kind of the consensus view amongst animal ethicists that the interest that animals have in continued life is less than the continued interest that humans, the interest in humans have in continued life. So that in the event of a conflict, the human life takes precedence, which is kind of the view that, as you know, that most animal ethicists take.
Well, it's the position that Reagan takes, but Singer would take the position, would he not? That, and I want to get to Reagan in a second because I'd like your views on something that Reagan says, but if you take Singer's position is that if he puts aside the non-human great apes and perhaps dolphins, but he basically says, certainly with respect to most of the animals that we consume as food, and chickens and cows and whatnot. I mean, he basically takes the position that per se killing them is not inflicting a harm on them because they don't have a sense of what it is to have a life, and yes, they do have an interest in not suffering, but they don't have an interest in life. So you would disagree with Singer on that position?
Yeah, I'm keen to distinguish myself from Singer in this regard. In the sense that as a utilitarian, he can't but help saying that or avoiding the question of animal lives, because a classical utilitarian, is only concerned really about the issue of suffering. But the difference between Singer and an animal welfare position is that for Singer, adopting a classical utilitarian principle, then the issue of human lives is equally irrelevant philosophically for him.
But he's a preference utilitarian, so he's not just a hedonistic utilitarian. He's a preference utilitarian. So and he, when he's determining what's permissible or not permissible, applying the utilitarian calculus, he's looking at interest satisfaction, and he's claiming that as an empirical matter, as a factual matter, animals don't have an interest in continuing to live. So that when you are trying to figure out whose interests are affected, I mean, that's why he says that human beings have an interest in continuing to live. So therefore, as a prima facie principle, we shouldn't be treating humans as replaceable resources. Even if we don't make them suffer by using them as replaceable resources, we shouldn't use them as replaceable resources. We can, because he's a utilitarian, so he's got to acknowledge that that there can be circumstances in which we could use humans as replaceable resources. But he explicitly says that using non-humans as replaceable resources doesn't raise the moral issue. The moral issue is the suffering issue, because as an empirical matter, and I don't see this as in any way, I mean, because you can have people on, you can have rights people. I mean, this is not peculiar to a utilitarian position. He maintains as an empirical matter they don't have an interest in continuing to live, and they don't have an interest in autonomy. They don't have an interest. They don't have the sorts of interests, liberty interests, autonomy interests, whatever. They don't have those interests, and therefore, taking those interests away it does not raise a moral issue. Yes,
and I disagree with him on that point for reasons perhaps we can explore in the third question. Whether you call this interest that animals have in not suffering a right is is a matter of semantics to me, because I think it's still less than a human's interest in life, and that's presumably where we differ.
Well, no, I mean, I would say whether I have an interest is an empirical question. Whether or not I have a right is simply a way of protecting an interest. So I don't.
Sure.
So I don't see it as a semantic thing. I have an interest. Whether or not my interest is protected in a particular way is a separate question from whether I have the interest. But let's get back to my cow in the backyard. How have I violated the right not to suffer if I treat the cow really, really well and I kill the cow in a completely painless way? How have I violated the right not to suffer?
You haven't at all. But the nuances in my argument would suggest that given that animals have an interest in continued life, which is less than the humans, unless you're killing the cow for a human purpose which is greater than a mere absence of suffering, then it becomes illegitimate.
So they have a right not to be used, but it's simply a right. I mean,
they have in that situation, their interests ought to be protected, because there's no substantial human interest which is being promoted by killing them in that situation.
So you'd have to be committed not only to getting rid of factory farming, you'd have to be committed to getting rid of all animal farming, presumably.
On that position, yes, except in those positions where killing and eating animals was necessary for human survival.
So in the situation where I'm on the lifeboat, I can kill and eat the cow, but you have to be a pretty big lifeboat to have a cow in it. But I can kill and eat the animal when I'm on the desert island, and there are no vegetable products for me to eat. I can kill and eat the animal,
yes.
But under no other circumstance can I do that.
If you adopt this nuanced position, this is, I think I raise this issue in the book in answer to a question. I mean, the point I'd raise is that in political or strategic terms, it's far easier to sell the argument about a right not to suffer than it would be to sell this rather elongated argument about an interest in life. But we still do differ in the sense that you rule out the use of animals absolutely, whereas I would say that it depends upon the circumstances.
Tell me a situation in which you think. I mean, because in Introduction to Animal Rights, I basically make that argument. I say that if I'm on a desert island and I have no vegetable products to eat, it may be morally excusable, not justifiable, but morally excusable for me to kill and eat an animal. But it would also be in those situations morally excusable for me to kill and eat a human. And I talk about those legal cases where people have actually engaged in situations like where they're shipwrecked and they're drifting at sea for 3 weeks or whatever, and then they kill somebody and they eat that person, and nobody thinks it's a good thing. Nobody thinks it's justifiable, but people regard it as excusable. That is, it's morally wrong, but we understand why people did it, and we think it mitigates their culpability. So so I wouldn't disagree. I mean, in a situation where I was starving to death and there was absolutely nothing else for me to eat, and I was going to die unless I killed another sentient being, it may be morally excusable for me to kill a sentient being, human or non-human, in a situation like that. Again, we wouldn't say it's morally good, but we would say it's understandable and my culpability is mitigated. But tell me, give me a situation in which you think you and I would disagree on animal use, because you're quite right to say I don't think we can use animals at all. So you're right. I do take that position. But what I'm trying to understand is, what is the situation in which you would think animal use would be okay? Give me an example.
Well, I think the issue of animal experimentation is probably more appropriate to discuss, in the sense that would you oppose the use of, assume, I know there's a big assumption to make, assume that it would be possible, scientists tell us that it would be possible to find or develop a drug which will deal effectively with potentially fatal disease, and assume that the science is there, that they're right to say that, and that the only way of doing it is to use animals. Would you then oppose that?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would not. Let me state it clearly. I would not kill a mouse to find a cure for cancer. I wouldn't do it. I mean, I mean, we would never be in a situation where we're going to do that, or where it would be possible for us to do it. So it's a completely unrealistic hypothetical. But and I think there are all sorts of empirical questions about the use of animals in biomedical experiments, which raise all tons and tons of empirical questions.
Yeah.
But if you push them all aside, and I think it's difficult to do that, but if you push them all aside and just ask the bare question, assuming hypothetically we could come up with a situation in which scientists say, if we use these animals in painful biomedical experiments in which they will be tortured and killed, but we could find a cure for a bad disease, would it be okay? My answer would be no. I would, well, and your answer would be different, I assume.
Well, it wouldn't, in the sense that the right not to suffer would rule out inflicting pain on animals in that situation. But if animals could be used in a way which didn't cause pain, and the benefits are clearly hugely important for humans, then I would regard that as unfortunately necessary. And I think that's where you and I differ.
Okay, but then I think it's a small point of disagreement, because if you're saying that we can't use animals not only for factory farming but for any eating purpose whatsoever, unless we're starving to death, I must say I certainly didn't think this was your position in the book, but I'm glad we're clarifying it now. But I was under the impression you thought factory farming was pretty much ruled out, but that alternative forms of agriculture, if they did not involve unacceptable levels of suffering, and we talked about in the book what that meant, and I was confused about what that meant. But that if animal agriculture didn't involve unacceptable levels of suffering, then we would be able to engage in animal agriculture. But what I hear you saying now is that animals have a right not to suffer unacceptably, but they also have a right. They have a right not to be used. That right, though, is weaker than the right of humans not to be used for the benefit of others, but that animals can only be used in situations in which they do not suffer at all. So we couldn't use the animals in painful biomedical experiments. We could only use them in non-painful biomedical experiments in which they would lose their lives, but which they would not suffer. But that basically we would rule out the use of all animals for food altogether, except in situations of starvation. We would rule out all use of animals for any sort of entertainment purpose by definition. And so the only use of animals about which you would disagree with me is, you would say, in the situation in which a completely painless experiment which presented tremendous benefits for humans, but didn't involve any animal suffering, then we could use the animals in that for that purpose. Is that what I hear?
There may be other uses of animals which don't cause suffering, which would be entirely legitimate for me, because they don't, even though they involve the use of, even though they use animals, and animals remain property whilst they're being used. But this issue is raised on, I've got the book in front of me actually, page 200 and 201, where I talk about the difference between what I call a sentience position, which is the right not to suffer, and then I raise the issue of what I call an enhanced sentient position, which I say might go further than this by suggesting that although humans have a greater interest in life, this doesn't mean that animals have no interest in life. And the qualification in what I call the enhanced sentience position is clearly significant. It's clearly significant because this would allow for scientific experimentation and the raising and killing of animals for food, provided that no suffering on animals was inflicted.
Okay, so all right, so let's take that then. If you're saying the enhanced sentience position would permit, and by the way, I think I pointed out, I was surprised when you announced that towards the end of the book, because I had understood you to be arguing what you called on page 202 or whatever, the sentience position in the book. So when you got to page 202 and said, well, there's this enhanced sentience position that would rule out basically, a lot of animal use except that which didn't involve unacceptable suffering. Okay, now that brings me to my situation with the cow. If the cow doesn't suffer at all, if she has a wonderful life and I kill her painlessly, how have I run afoul of the enhanced sentience position? Because the enhanced sentience position is I can't use her. Looking, I have one of the remaining copies from that run left. Let me see. Okay, I'm just looking at the enhanced sentience position would rule out experimentation and the raising of animals for food unless life were at stake, irrespective of the level of suffering inflicted. So in that situation, what you're saying is basically the enhanced sentience position would be largely indistinguishable from my position.
In the case of eating animals for food, yes.
And presumably it would be the same as my position in every case except for the use of animals in experiments in which there is no suffering.
Well, there'd be uses of animals in other spheres which you might think is unacceptable because it involves their use, which I wouldn't, because it doesn't cause suffering.
But that's my example of the cow. There was no suffering with the eating of the cow. So why would?
Yes, so I would object to that. Yes.
But what? Okay. I'm just trying to get a handle on what uses you would think would be acceptable under the enhanced sentience position.
Well, in abstract terms, it'd be the use of animals in any sphere which didn't involve the infliction of suffering and the loss of life.
Okay. So if I raise the cow and I allow the cow to die of natural causes, then that would be okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I didn't really understand that that was the position that you were taking. Let me ask you this: I'm not sure where. Okay, let's look at this enhanced sentience position for a second, because my right not to be used is derived from the general notion that animals are members of the moral community, and they can't be members of the moral community as long as they have no intrinsic or inherent interest, and by definition, they can't have intrinsic or inherent interest as long as they are property, because property, to be property, is even to be regulated property, is to be something that has only extrinsic or external value and doesn't have inherent or intrinsic moral value. And I don't think any economist would or legal theorist would I mean, people believe that you can regulate property better, and they believe that you can you can accord greater weight to animal interests, but the bottom line is, if they're property, to say that they are, it's a binary world. You're either property or you're not property, and if you're property, if you're chattel property, you have no inherent or intrinsic value. So my argument has always been, well, if animals are members of the moral community, that means they have to have inherent or intrinsic moral value, and what that means is, at the very minimum, they can't be property. But once you say they can't be property, the whole house of cards comes collapsing down, because all institutionalized animal use and animal exploitation rests on the notion that animals are property. So that's where I derive my right from, my right not to be used. It is not clear to me where you derive your right not to suffer unacceptably, or this enhanced sentience position, which I'm pleasantly surprised to hear, but somewhat surprised to hear, is really sort of a right not to be used. It's pretty much extensive with a right not to be used. I mean, there are some minor exceptions, but basically the world that you would construct and the world that I would construct would be largely the same. I mean, there would be some differences, but they would be very, very, very minor differences, and certainly we wouldn't. There'd be minor differences based on what you just said. So tell me, where does this right come? Where do these rights come from?
Well, fundamentally, it derives from the interests that animals have and the interests that humans have when we accord rights to humans. So that an animal's interest in continued life must be reflected morally in some aspect of our moral theory. But given that human interest in continued life, I argue, is much more considerable, then that would mean, in the event of a conflict, the interest that humans have in continued life must prevail. So my moral theory is based fundamentally on interest, and there is as you know, there is this debate within rights theory between interest-based theories of rights and will-based theories of rights. Whereas the will-based theory is based on the need, perceived need for autonomy or choice, whereas the interest-based theory is based entirely on well-being. So I'm very much in the interest-based camp. I should perhaps say that one of the arguments I did make in the book, which has probably led to this some of this slight confusion, is that I would argue that the sentience position, as opposed to the enhanced sentience position, is much more politically or strategically sensible, so that perhaps that explains why the articulation of the enhanced sentience position doesn't take a prominent part in my essay. Although I have to say that I did raise the issue of animals' interest in continued life in the essay, but didn't explore the moral dimension of that.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. When you say I want to get to that, because I think that if we say, well, the sentience position, the interest of animals in not suffering is the primary thing, and that has it's more acceptable from a pragmatic point of view. Then that gets us into the whole, well, this is what the animal protection groups are doing now. They're pursuing happy meat labels and all of these sorts of welfare reforms. Yes. And that sort of gets us to the well, what do we do in terms of practical politics? And you and I hesitate to say this. I say I think we disagree about that, but I might find
we definitely do. Yeah.
Okay, but before we get there, I want to ask you this question: why do you in the book you say that you agree with other moral philosophers and disagree with me that that you think that other things being equal, human life has greater moral value than non-human life. Now, I understand that from a theological point of view, but I don't understand you'd be making a theological argument. So what I'm wanting to know is, why do you think that human life has a greater moral value than non-human life? I mean, and I want to say I agree that you're certainly Singer says that. I mean, most moral philosophers say that, and even Reagan says that, because Reagan says that, you know, when you're on the lifeboat and you've got a choice between throwing the dog out or throwing the human out, you have a moral obligation to throw the dog out. And indeed, he says you've got a moral obligation if it's a question of 1 million dogs versus one person. You have one human. You have the obligation to throw over the 1 million dogs, because death is less of a harm for each of the dogs than it is for the human. And I always found that to be odd, and I actually wrote an essay about that in the mid 1990s. I wrote an essay that was I think it was Between the Species. I included it in my Animals as Persons book in 2008, in which I argued that that's a serious flaw for Reagan's theory, because if there's a non-arbitrary way of distinguishing moral agents from moral patients, such that whenever you're in a situation of conflict between a human and an animal, you have a moral obligation to choose the human, then it would seem that you've got a non-arbitrary way of distinguishing moral agents from moral patients for the purposes of justifying institutionalized exploitation. So you certainly would be able to justify, on Reagan's view, you certainly would be able to justify vivisection, and indeed vivisection that caused pain and suffering. I mean, I don't see how he can avoid that. If there's a non-arbitrary way of distinguishing moral agents from moral patients, I just don't think there is. I mean, I think that Tom's view that, and for those of you who are not familiar with Reagan's view on this, Reagan maintains that humans have greater opportunities for satisfaction than non-humans. So therefore, death is always a greater harm for a human than it is for a non-human. And I mean, I suppose he could be persuaded that there could be certain situations in which you had a mentally disabled human being, a severely mentally disabled human being who was sentient but nevertheless had very few opportunities for satisfaction, and a dog, and he might say in that situation the dog has greater opportunities for satisfaction. But he's making a general species point that humans have greater opportunities for satisfaction, and I disagreed with that then. I disagreed with it now, and I don't understand why. I mean, I have 5 dogs, and they seem to. The things that they have that they get satisfaction from seem to be much greater in terms of number than the sorts of things that we get satisfaction. In fact, the things that humans get satisfaction from. But I'm wondering, why do you think that this? I know you're not advancing a theological position, so tell me why you think it has a moral cash value in a non-theological sense.
Yeah. So first of all, in reference to Tom Reagan's argument, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, he does talk about inherent value as being something you either possess or you don't, and you possess it and don't possess it equally. So that would imply at least that animals and humans, humans and non-human animals have equal inherent value. I would raise a slight problem with trying to extrapolate from his lifeboat example, because as many philosophers have pointed out, the lifeboat case is not an exact parallel of, say, the use of animals in experimentation, in the sense that animals don't choose to be in the lifeboat. So it isn't the same kind of choice involved as deciding to use animals in experimentation, which is hoped will help humans.
Well, but isn't he saying though, Robert? Isn't he saying in a situation of conflict, he would say, I think, in a situation of true conflict, however it's constructed, and so we could say, I mean, plausibly say that in a situation where you have human beings who have cancer and you have animals who could provide data that would be, and I'm assuming, I'm making a lot of assumptions here because I think animal experimentation is basically voodoo science, but let's just take it on its own terms. Let's assume you say, as an empirical matter, you've got humans with a disease, you've got animals who can provide data that would be that would causally lead, and you can make a direct argument. You can make an argument about direct causation to a cure. Wouldn't he, based on what he says in the case for animal rights in the section on the lifeboat, isn't he committed to saying that you've got, if there's no other way to do it, then you've got to choose the humans over the non-humans?
I used to think that, but I'm not so sure now, because I'm not sure that the parallels are exact. I mean, if you're talking about, say, rescuing a human or a non-human animal from a burning building, that would seem to be a different scenario from whether or not to use non-human animals in scientific experimentation, because the animals in the burning building, whereas in the case of scientific experimentation, we choose to use animals in that way, and if we didn't use animals in that way, they would be fine. Whereas the burning building scenario is slightly different; it's either us or them, as it were. So I think it's Well, but wait a minute. Then the burning house or the boat examples become sort of useless in terms of hypotheticals for moral theory, because the number of times we actually encounter the dog in the burning house or the dog on the lifeboat are pretty small. What we do encounter in life is correctly or incorrectly perceived situations in which it's us or them. Now, I agree with you that to say it's us or them in the context of eating animals is not an accurate characterization of the situation, unless you are on that desert island and you're starving to death and it's us or them. Certainly. Okay, well, let's take the desert island situation. Reagan would say in the situation where I'm on the desert island, I've got an obligation if I can kill and eat a human or a non-human, I have I have an obligation based on species to kill the non-human rather than the human. But I want to. What I'm trying to get to is the vivisection hypothetical, although it's deeply flawed because it makes all sorts of assumptions, but as just from a purely normative moral analysis, we can hypothesize a situation where it's us or them, where if we don't, a plague comes, and if we don't kill a bunch of animals, we are not going, a large number of us will not survive or whatever. Or if we don't kill these animals, we will not find a cure for cancer, and many of us will die. Now, I think if we became vegans, many fewer of us would die from cancer, so we wouldn't even have to think about animal experimentation. But I'm talking about the hypothetical. How is that different? How is the only way we're going to find the cure for cancer is by using the animals? How is that any different from the lifeboat situation? Yes, the animals are on the lifeboat. The animal is in the burning building, whereas we're reaching out and we're using the animals. But it's in a situation. I understand that's a difference, but it just seems to me to be a difference without much of a distinction, because in the situation we're basically saying, in both situations we're saying it's us or them. So I understand the differences. I just don't see them as. I don't understand why they're morally relevant. Well, we could use humans in that situation, couldn't we, in terms of finding a cure for cancer? And that would, given the differences between humans and non-humans, that will be more likely to produce results, one would have thought.
Well, I agree. That's one of the arguments I make. But that gets us to why because you say in the book that you think that all other things equal, animals have lesser moral value than humans do, and I'm confused about that, because I don't see why. I don't agree with that, obviously, and I argue in the book that that's not the case. And I'd like to know, what is your view? Why do you think animals have lesser moral value? Animal life has lesser moral value than human life?
I think the best way of demonstrating the greater value of human lives is to examine the harm caused by death. Now, this can happen in two ways, I think. I mean, firstly, death causes harm to those who lose their lives because it denies a desire to stay alive. In my view, it's doubtful if most animals even understand the concept of staying alive, let alone having a desire to do so. Whereas humans, by contrast, do have such knowledge of the concept of death, and therefore can be harmed by death in a way that animals can't. But I think there's another way in which death can cause harm, and this is in terms of the opportunities that are lost by death.
So you don't think animals have a desire to continue to live?
Well, they don't understand the concept of continued life.
Well, they don't understand it the same way we. Presumably, they don't understand it the same way we understand it. But I mean, to say that they have an interest is to say that simply that they have a preference or desire or want to stay alive.
Well, they have
right?
Yes, but arguably the preference to avoid suffering is greater. So therefore, the painless death of animals isn't necessarily the same kind of harm as it would be for humans. But there's another way, of course, in which death can cause harm, and that's in terms of the opportunities that are lost by death. And there, I think, it's wrong to say that the painless death causes no harm because we're unaware of it. And I would argue that applies to both humans and animals, and that's why I think that animals do have an interest in continued life. Because of the death of an animal prevents the future possibility of pleasurable experiences. But my point is that the harm caused by the death of a human is much greater, and this is because humans lead richer lives, and in particular the intellectual capacities of humans means that they can plan for the future in ways that animals can't, and therefore the death of a human involves the loss of those opportunities in ways that it doesn't for animals. Now, I recognize that it's important to exercise caution about the value of animal life. I'm aware of the philosophical doubts about when it comes to the cognitively more able species, such as the great apes, for instance. But, even if we accept that animal experiences are less sophisticated than those of humans, there's still a possibility that they might be more intense than ours. And as you say, animals have experiences humans don't have, and as I say in the book, these may be extremely enriching. But I think, the bottom line is I think we should exercise caution before claiming that the subjective experiences of animals are somehow inferior to human experiences.
I really believe that it's impossible to make what appears to be a descriptive or an empirical assessment that isn't really a normative assessment based on species. And I think also even if you could make it, you then end up, if you're not going to be speciesist about it, then you are, I believe, committed logically to saying that human beings who are cognitively more able or who have greater satisfaction in life matter more morally. Not to say that we should go around wantonly eating humans or using them in biomedical experiments, but in situations of conflict. And we could argue about what conflict means, or when we could identify legitimate situations of conflict. It would seem to me we would be hard pressed to deny that in situations of conflict, if we're not going to be speciesist about it, we would be committed to saying that I've got to sacrifice one human as opposed to another. I'm in a situation of conflict, however you construct it. However, you would agree that it's a one or the other situation. If there's somebody who's happy and enjoys life every day, gets up every day and goes out and spends all day gazing at daffodils, because that person derives great satisfaction from doing that and really does enjoy it. And then you have somebody who is really depressed and doesn't get a whole lot of satisfaction out of life. Then we'd be morally committed to choosing to sacrifice the depressed person, or the person who's far less intelligent, and does, it's somebody who's not very smart and sort of is bitter and doesn't really enjoy life very much and whatever, and somebody who is more intelligent and every day reads Shakespeare and says, boy, it's great to be alive. We'd be committed to making those distinctions within species, right? I mean, wouldn't we?
No, because as Darwin pointed out, even though there's no great distinction between human and non-human levels of cognitive awareness. The least intelligent, normal adult human is significantly more cognitively able than the most able non-human animal. So that you wouldn't be distinguished between different levels of intelligence in human beings.
But why not? But why wouldn't the principle still be the same? Let's assume that's right. Let's assume that I think they may be different, as I argue in the book and other things I've written. I think that animal cognition, because animals don't use symbolic communication, I have no doubt that animal cognition is different. I don't know that we can talk about it being better, or it being more enriching, or as a matter of fact, I don't think we can do that without making speciesist assumptions. But let's assume that we could say that, well, as a general matter, the cognition of humans is more enriched and more it's more enriched than the cognition of non-humans, as a general matter. Got to be careful, but as a general matter. And that, therefore, the lives of non-humans are worth less, all other things being equal, are worth less morally than the lives of humans because of this. Now, again, I think there are all sorts of problems with that, and I don't know how, I don't think that argument works for the reasons I articulate in the book. However, let's assume it does. Then are you not committed? I don't see why you would not be committed to the idea that you've got to sort of apply the same reasoning within species, so that you'd have to if you have a choice to if you can distinguish, if you have a choice of using a chicken or using a non-human great ape, you would certainly be obligated to use the chicken and not the non-human great ape. And then which a lot of animal ethicists, I mean Singer makes that distinction. He basically says that the life of the non-human great ape matters more than the life of the chicken because of this. So you would be making distinctions within the class of beings known as non-humans. The question becomes, why don't you make the same distinction within the class of humans? Because you would then be in a situation in which you would be committed. You'd be in a situation in which you have to choose. There are no animals on the planet. No animals. All the animals are gone. And we have a choice of we could find a cure for cancer, and we're going to respect your right not to suffer. We're not going to make any of these two humans suffer, but we're going to kill one in order to find the cure for cancer. We can't use non-human animals. We've got a choice between somebody who's cognitively sophisticated and has a lot of opportunities for satisfaction, and somebody who is less cognitively able and has fewer opportunities for satisfaction. It seems to me your answer is, well, because humans have sort of this minimal important level that sort of rules out their use in this way, but then that becomes totally arbitrary and totally based on species. It has nothing to do anymore with the characteristics that translate into moral worth. It has to do with species being a marker for that, right?
Well, it isn't related to species in the sense that we're talking about the characteristics which normal adult humans possess. If you're talking about the use of marginal humans, and that brings us into a very different set of arguments. And indeed, you're right to say that Singer does not only talk about the use of different uses or different characteristics being morally relevant amongst non-humans. He also talks about different characteristics being morally relevant within the human species too. And in fact, he's as you know, he's invoked more controversy by saying that than he has talking about animals, actually. But we are talking about situations where it's necessary to choose. So, because animals I argue that animals have an interest in continued life, we could only sacrifice that interest if a situation occurred where human lives were at stake, and clearly that is extremely restrictive. And I think in a world where there were no animals to use, clearly there'd be a different set of moral arguments about what we'd do in situations where we thought it was necessary to choose, such as in finding cures for cancer and so forth. But I think I think the bottom line here for me is that we need to try to avoid, as I say in the book, to avoid making claims that are open to challenge, particularly if there's an alternative position that offers a strong ethical case for the better treatment of animals. And I think what I've tried to do and what we've explored in this podcast is to look at what the consequences would be of adopting the moral position that I do.
Okay. A central point of disagreement between us is that you believe regulationist groups such as the RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, Compassion in World Farming, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, the Humane Society of the United States, are seeking and achieving worthwhile wins. Do you believe that any of these wins does much more than make animal use more economically efficient? If so, can you identify them? And do you believe that these groups are stimulating demand for higher welfare products in a way that will adversely affect overall demand? First, let's look at the economic efficiency argument, because that's a central part of my work, which I don't think you defenders of regulation appreciate as much as you should, and that is that if you look at the history of animal welfare reforms, in my judgment, they are by and large advances that make animal use, they increase production efficiency. So if you look at things like gestation crates, and you look at veal crates, stunning of poultry versus gassing of poultry, most of the subjects of campaigns are things that actually make animal exploitation more economically efficient, to the extent that there are minor increases in production costs. For example, going from conventional batteries to enriched cages, which is what is required under the directive of the European Commission, which is supposed to be implemented by 2012, which will never be implemented by 2012. But you're talking about minor increases. Even cage-free eggs, the costs are actually very, very small, and given the what we call elasticities of demand, in that if, and I'm not saying this for Robert's benefit because he knows about elasticities of demand, I'm saying this for those of you who aren't familiar with some of these economic terms. If to say that demand for something is inelastic is to say if you raise the price, you don't really affect demand much, and to say that demand is elastic is to say that small increases in prices will result in shifts of demand, and that basically, to the extent that animal welfare reforms have added any production costs, and it's very, very hard to find those that have, they have by and large been very, very small. And they are the sorts of things that can be passed along to the consumers, so they actually benefit institutionalized exploitation. So it's not clear to me that these welfare reforms, these things for which these organizations campaign for, are particularly are doing anything to shift the idea towards inherent value of animals. If anything, what they're doing is making production efficiency. They're increasing production efficiency and making animal exploitation more economically efficient. I mean, why do you disagree with that? I'd like to know why.
Well, this is another very complex question, and I would make the first point I would make is that I think we need to ask, why is it that economic efficiency is the prime motivation behind much of the regulation? And I think we can come back to that when we perhaps talk about the causes of particular kinds of regulation. But on the specific issue of economic efficiency, I'd say that reforms improving the welfare of animals that also have the effect of making animal exploitation more efficient are clearly easier to achieve, because you're not having to fight with producers to the same degree as you would otherwise. So that's clearly why they've taken prominence. In addition to that, I think it should be noted that there are plenty of examples where producers have campaigned vigorously against proposed reforms on grounds of economic cost, but they've also still lost. So we heard...
But they always do that, though, Robert. They
have to do
that. They have to do that.
They do, but then how do you know that it's not true?
Well, because you look at the economic analysis. I mean, for example, in 1985 in this country, when we had the amendments to the Animal Welfare Act, the primary change in that amendment was the addition of animal care committees, and researchers were jumping up and down and saying, "Oh, this is really terrible. This is going to be the end of biomedical research as we know it," and blah 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 blah. And they campaigned very, very vigorously against it, and it was, and I thought it was, I actually thought it was a great educational event for me, because it taught me an enormous amount about how this all works. And they campaigned vigorously against it, even though it was absolutely clear that it was for their benefit, that the creation of animal care committees, particularly the sorts of animal care committees that were being proposed, would allow them to point to these mechanisms, which were useless, that they would be able to point to them and say, we're regulated the same way institutional review boards regulate human experimentation at all the universities in the United States, and so therefore we'll have a parallel system of subject regulation, which is nonsense. It's absolute. I mean, there's no such thing as informed consent in the context of animal experiments, for one distinction, and there are many others as well. But they fought against it, and they fought against it vigorously. And I remember, talking with people, including people from the National Institutes of Health, and speaking with them and saying, why are you guys fighting this like this? I mean, this is a gift to you. I think the animal people are wrong to be campaigning for this. I think it's a silly campaign. I think it's ill-advised. And why, but the question becomes, I'm sort of curious as an academic, why are you? I was a young, still idealistic law professor at the time. I'm still an idealistic law professor, and I asked him, I said, I don't understand why y'all are fighting about this. And I was told by a number of people basically the same thing. They weren't sitting in the same room at the same time, so it wasn't that they were all listening to each other, but they were basically giving me the same response. We have to fight everything that the animal people do. If we don't impose an opportunity cost on your campaigns, then you'll have no disincentive to bring them, and you'll do all sorts of things we don't want you to do. So we'll fight anything you come along with, including things that we ultimately think are not all that terribly bad. And it was the same thing with the Humane Slaughter Act of 1958. It was the same thing with, look at the whole business with gassing chickens. If you were to start a slaughterhouse, if you were to start a slaughtering operation tomorrow, and you chose electric stunning rather than controlled atmosphere killing, I would think you would have to have a psychiatric evaluation, because you would be acting economically irrationally. It is absolutely clear that controlled atmosphere killing is, other things being equal, is a much more economically efficient way of killing animals, not only because it cuts down on the actual the costs of actual killing, but it cuts down on carcass damage, and it cuts down on the economic efficiencies are considerable. They're absolutely considerable, and I have no doubt that all of the chicken suppliers, all the poultry suppliers, are going to switch to controlled atmosphere killing eventually. Some of them have capital costs involved in their present thing, and they may make economic decisions about when they're going to do that and whatnot. But there's a dance going on right now, and it's a highly orchestrated dance. of the animal advocates who are saying we must do this because it's chicken rights or whatever. The rallying cry of the revolution. Let's gas those chickens. And you have the institutional exploiters saying, no, we're not going to do that, and blah 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 blah. They'll fight about it. And the result will be they'll eventually switch to controlled atmospheric killing, and the costs that they've spent, that industry has spent in fighting this, will be well invested, because ultimately what they lose is nothing, and what they gain is time and focusing the issue on something that is largely irrelevant vis-a-vis animal welfare in terms of really making change, of changes that are going to really, provide significant improvements or cut down the number of animals. This is not going to do anything to decrease the number of animals. It's not going to add anything to the cost of chicken production. If anything, it's going to lower it. So when you say, how do I know? The answer is you look at the economic data. I could tell you, you could predict these things. You read the I read agricultural journals. I suspect you look at them as well. And you can, you see articles written by agricultural economists, and they're always talking about, this practice or that practice should be changed because it's not economically beneficial. And, they were saying those things about gestation crates a few years ago. Now what do we have? We have a gestation crate campaign. They said those things about the veal crates. We had the veal crate campaign. There are issues now about mega dairies, which you're dealing with in the United Kingdom. It's puzzling to me. There's most dairy in Britain is produced in intensive agriculture, in intensive situations. The fact that they're going to have even greater intensive situations in Lincolnshire or wherever they're putting these places is not going to really matter to the cows one way or another, because the intensity is going to be in terms of numbers and not in terms of individual animals. And there are some people who are saying, well, this is really sort of a bad thing because the costs, the externalized costs, the environmental costs and stuff like that, make this really sort of not a good thing to do. So, so what do we have? We have compassionate world farming. Every time I turn on the computer and I look at, Philip Limbury's tweets, he's talking about the mega dairies at Nocton. So, you can identify these things.
Yeah, on the issue of the mega dairies, it'd be interesting to see what kind of opposition is mounted against them. I've heard that's become a quite a significant issue, and could well affect its prospects of being implemented. But I think you're right to say that the costs will often be exaggerated by producers. I think you're absolutely right about that. And in response to that, I would say that I would say that we should look at the possibilities of the abstract possibilities of making changes that do actually increase costs. And what happens when costs are increased for producers is that they're passed on to consumers. And most of the opposition to animal welfare reforms in the UK hasn't been based on so much as the increased costs to producers. I think to some degree they've largely accepted that in terms of stalls and tethers, and in terms of the prohibition of battery cages too. What the issue that producers have raised is the potential for say British producers to be put at a disadvantage in terms of the European Union, because imports will be cheaper and therefore British producers will suffer economically. So in those situations, they haven't really denied the fact that there will be extra costs of these changes, and the evidence suggests that there are extra costs.
In some cases.
Yeah, sure. I accept that in a number of cases I've come across many cases where producers have clearly, interviews I've done with producers for previous projects, you're absolutely right. They do exaggerate the costs, and this is partly because they think it's the thin end of the wedge, as you say. That make one change and the whole card pack will come tumbling down. The other point I'd make here, I think, is that it's useful to ask, again, an issue I raised in the book, it's useful to ask what's meant by economic efficiency here. And the obvious definition of economic efficiency is the production of a product in the quickest possible time at the cheapest possible price. And if that's the goal, then animal welfare is clearly likely to suffer. But another definition relates to the profitability that might involve a recognition or a perception that consumers want better welfare standards, so that these costs are passed on then to consumers. So there's a potential for making economic efficiency more compatible with animal welfare. And the case of battery eggs versus free-range eggs is an example of that. But I'd reiterate that in my view, there's nothing written in stone about animal welfare legislation, and it isn't inevitable that economic efficiency must take precedence over animal welfare. I think a lot of it depends upon the kind of pressure put upon producers by the general public.
But what I'm saying, though, is that animal welfare gets defined in terms of economic efficiency, and that is the history of animal welfare legislation, I believe. I don't think that it's all that terribly controversial, and I think the instances that you can point to that are counterexamples of certain bans of this or bans of that have much more to do with class issues. I mean, for example, in this country, people get all upset about dog fighting. They get all upset about the use by people from San Domingo or Cuba or whatever in terms of animal sacrifices. But these are sort of almost class and cultural things, as because they're irrational in terms of their basis of objection. But what you're saying is there's no reason why you can't. There's no reason why you couldn't, in theory, have consumers demanding a higher level of welfare. I've never disputed that. Of course, you could have consumers demanding a higher level of welfare that goes beyond economic efficiency. The problem is that you've got to educate consumers to do that, and not only do you have to educate consumers to do that, but you'd have to have consumers who significantly cared enough about animals. If you really wanted to make a difference in animal welfare, and you really wanted to get away from the factory farming model and go towards a model in which there is significant protection of animal interests. I still think it would be immoral, but if you wanted to move toward a system like that, could you do it? Well, in theory you could, but you'd have to educate. People would have to care enough to pay lots more money for their animal products. And so then you end up with one of two situations. A situation which is just like sort of purely elitist, where only the wealthy can afford to eat animal products, or you end up in a situation in which you've educated people about the inherent value of animals and they stop eating them. I mean, in other words, I think the amount of time and effort that has to go into somebody in educating the public about paying 17 times what they pay now to get meat or dairy products that are produced with greater regard for animal interests. You put that amount of time in and you'll get them to stop eating. I mean, if they care enough to pay that amount of money, they care enough to stop eating them. And I think that, I think we're deluding ourselves when we say, well, the difference between, that there's a real difference between a conventional battery egg and a cage-free egg. I mean, there are cage-free operations up, I believe, in Scotland. I haven't seen them in Scotland. I've seen pictures of them, but I've seen some here. And the cage-free operations here, and vis-a-vis the conventional battery egg, I mean, the idea that people are buying these cage-free eggs and saying, oh, this is really good. This is really good morally. And the answer is no, it's not. They're still tortured. They are still being tortured, and they may be tortured slightly less than in the battery cage. But they're being tortured. And so I think there's a real issue about why, whether it's a good idea to be promoting those sorts of things as morally desirable. This is where I have a problem with all these campaigns. I mean, I think these labels which are proliferating in your country and here, in terms of there are now, like, half dozen of these things, if not more. Organizations, animal organizations, charging, I believe they charge fees to use these things, to certify that these products are humane, or whatever they are, and the idea that this is not increasing demand, they wouldn't be doing it if it was. I mean, why would they be doing this if they didn't think it was going to have an effect in the marketplace? And as I point out in the book, I'm really troubled by the promotional literature of the RSPCA saying, look, we're working with producers to make, we're going to help you sell animal products. We're going to work with you. We're going to show you how it's economically. I mean, they make the efficiency argument. I don't. I mean, well, I do in the book, and I do in my, but I'm saying they make the efficiency argument for me. If you look at the RSPCA literature about freedom food, what they tell you is that it is economically beneficial for the producer to enter into one of these schemes. And so, you don't even have to take my word for it. It's what the RSPCA is saying. Recently, HSUS made the statement with respect to the Ohio Board of Standards of Animal Welfare that that getting rid of gestation crates, sometime in the next 400 years or whenever they're going to get rid of them in the future, that this is something that makes animal consumption more acceptable to the public, and that was actually stated explicitly. I have it quoted on my website. So I mean, the organizations seem to recognize this. You don't think that that's a problem?
I think it's a problem when the welfare-friendly products aren't particularly good, where they do exaggerate the quality of the animal welfare being promoted. And I do think there's a difference between genuine animal welfare regulation and substandard animal welfare regulation. I mean, the example that the one that we talk about in the book is the difference between enriched cages and genuine free-range chickens, which is clearly an important distinction. And in some ways, public opinion in Europe is ahead of the regulations on this, in the sense that most supermarkets in the UK won't sell battery eggs or eggs from enriched cages, whereas the EU regulations are only moving very, very slowly towards enriched cages. But some members of Europe, such as the European Union, such as Germany, are moving towards prohibiting any kind of cage birds.
Do you think that there's a significant welfare difference between a conventional battery cage and cage-free? Have you been to a cage-free facility?
Well, a genuine free range, I said. I mean, and it depends on the amount of space and the general quality of the regulation. But there's clearly a difference between a good regulation and a bad regulation in this sense. So I'm not denying the point that, as I never have, that animal welfare reforms leave a lot to be desired, as I've said numerous times in the past. But I think you can make a distinction between good animal welfare regulations and poor animal welfare regulations, and that the cause of the difference is often to do with the political will that exists at any particular time, and that kind of leads us on to talking about the property dimension of this, I guess. We're now talking about economic efficiency prior to talking about the issue of what I call the counterproductive argument, the argument that you use about the tendency for happy meat to make consumers complacent. And I think there are a number of arguments to make against that kind of argument.
Okay, well, go ahead and make them. I mean, if they weren't making consumers complacent, why do you think these organizations are all falling over themselves to develop these labels? I mean, they obviously think there's some value there, right?
Yeah, I mean, let me, for the benefit of people listening, it might be useful to sketch out what the argument is. I mean, what you call like the kind of happy meat argument, what I call the counterproductive argument, is that you think if reformist animal welfare objectives are successful, then they'll hinder the achievement of abolitionist goals by making the consumption of animal products more acceptable. And I think that's a crucial part of your argument, because if it fails, then the additional argument about the animal welfare reforms are in any case of little value becomes much less important. In other words, if the pursuit of animal welfare reforms bears no costs for animal advocates, because it doesn't deter people from becoming vegans or vegetarians, then there's a greater case for pursuing them, even if the benefits are going to be slight. If there's no costs involved in the promotion of animal welfare reforms. So I think it's quite a crucial part of the debate. And the first point I'd make is that I'd regard effective animal welfare reforms, those that genuinely reduce animal suffering, as ethically desirable, irrespective of whether they're a staging post to abolition. So I do think that genuine free range agriculture is preferable to factory farming.
Well, what do you mean by general free range? What do you mean by general? I mean, let's take eggs for example. Now, I mean. Free-range eggs, you can have a variety of situations which can be classified as free-range, correct? I mean, you don't have to. We're not talking about chickens always outside or having shelter in inclement weather. We're talking, for example, free-range can be nothing more than cage-free, plus there's an area where some of the animals can circulate through. I mean, the animals all have access to some outside space, but never all at one time, and it's a fairly small sort of piece of the barn. That can be free range as well, right?
It depends in which regulatory regime you're talking about. Within the UK's one, I think the regulations are a little bit more strict than that, and stocking densities are obviously hugely important. But I'm talking in the abstract about effective, or what I regard as genuine free range systems, which would require much more space. Stocking densities would be much less. They would enable the birds to be outside and to get shelter from the elements. And I would regard those kind of systems as ethically much more desirable than what exists now. I mean, that's the first point I'd make. But I think the more substantive point is that I think it's difficult to prove or disprove this counterproductive argument, because I think it involves a kind of speculative judgment. If such and such is done, then a future objective won't be possible. So it involves a claim that if animal welfare reforms are pursued successfully, then abolitionist goals will not be achieved because not enough people would want them. But I don't see how that can be proved or disproved.
Well, I grant that these are difficult things. These are difficult things to know definitively. It just seems to me that, first of all, you made the statement that genuine and significant welfare reforms would be ethically desirable. Well, would that we had a chance to see what those look like, because the ones that we are currently dealing with, I don't regard as significant at all. I see them as being largely efficiency producing measures, things that producers would do anyway, even if there weren't animal welfare campaigns, because ultimately, if there were no animal welfareists on the planet, animal institutional employers would do most of these things anyway, because it's in their economic best interest. People have to remember, animal factory farming is something that that developed in the 1950s. It started in the 1940s, but basically developed in the 1950s and the 1960s. And it is only now that agricultural economists are beginning to identify certain practices of animal use that are economically inefficient. And for the benefit of people who aren't all that familiar with the economic arguments, for example, people in the 1950s thought, well, if you can make $10 by having 10 animals in a barn, you can make you can make $100 by putting 100 animals in the barn and just stuffing them in. And people weren't factoring in the fact that these are sentient beings and that they will suffer stress with certain densities, and that the certain densities the stress will result in illness, and that will result in the need for veterinary care, et cetera, et cetera. So you had people who were saying, well, let's put all these these veal calves in crates, and we can do this, and we can sell this white veal and blah blah blah, but people weren't taking into account that if you have animals isolated like that because they're sentient beings, they suffer stress, they then have illnesses, they then require veterinary care. That raises the opportunity cost of animal ownership and adds to the production costs. So, now, it's only now in the early part of the 21st century that agricultural economists are beginning to say, hey, gee, gestation crates are a problem. Hey, gee, there are other practices, veal crates, other practices. The egg producers are saying, well, maybe the battery cages ought to be larger. Maybe that would be better. Maybe that would result in overall greater efficiency when all factors are taken into consideration. And indeed, interestingly, Robert, I don't know what the British studies show, but the American studies show that if producers switch to cage-free, it actually will cost them less than if they change their operations to have the larger cages that are recommended by the egg producing industry. So that's at least something I have seen in print. So I think that first you're talking about significant increases. I don't believe those things exist yet, number one. Number two...
But that's the key point, isn't it? I mean, if we agreed that there haven't been effective animal welfare regulations, then how do you know then that if there were them, that would deter people from becoming vegetarian or vegan?
Because I know that I have, you and I have been doing this for a long time. I mean, we're going on almost 30 years of doing this. At least I am, and the sort of resistance I see, and the fact that industry, and the fact that sort of the general economic constraints limit welfare reform to these very, very minor sorts of things. Why? Then it's very speculative on your part to say that, well, we're going to, because you say this in the book. You say, well, we got to keep pushing. We've got to get more progressive welfare reforms. And the answer is, why do you think that that's even feasible, given the economics? Why do you think that's even feasible, particularly in a world in which animal exploiters, in which markets are international. So even if you were to persuade somebody in country X to do something, if country X is part of some regional or international free trade agreement and can't limit the import of lower welfare products, if the demand for the lower welfare products is there's going to be a problem. So you don't really change anything for all intents and purposes. Those people who want the lower welfare product will buy it. And so all I'm saying is, I think it's going to be, as a practical matter, the idea that we're going to get progressive welfare reform is incredibly speculative, number one. And number two, as a common sense matter, it's a zero-sum game. I mean, to the extent that we're putting effort into these progressive welfare reforms, which we don't have yet, to the extent that we're doing that, we're not putting time and effort into educating people about not eating animals at all. And you can say, well, you can put all the time and effort you want into that, and you have no proof it's going to work. And the answer is, I don't have studies that show it's going to work, but I have my own experience, and I see what's happening now with the abolitionist movement, which is basically a group of it's a total grassroots. I mean, we don't have there's there's no large abolitionist organization. That is for sure. It is basically, it's basically grassroots organization in different countries where people are doing grassroots educational efforts. And what we are all finding is that people are very, very responsive. And people are interested in hearing about, that many people do think that when they buy something with a label, they're buying a higher welfare product, or they feel better about it, and things like that. I agree with you. More study needs to be done, but I think just as my position. You can say that my position is speculative. It seems to me to make sense in that if people are concerned about an issue, and the people who are identified as animal rights people or animal protection people or animal people as a general matter, if they come forward and say, yeah, that's an all right, this is good, eat cage-free eggs, this is good, eat gas chicken, that most people are going to do exactly what these organizations think they're going to do, which is why they're presenting this in the first place. They're going to say, yeah, okay, I feel better about this now. And so if you tell people who care about an issue that the experts in the area, the supposed experts in the area, put a stamp of approval on something, that's exactly what you're going to get is behavior in accordance with what those people say. And so all I'm saying is that, that seems to me to make sense. And what I'm proposing is that we put resources into vegan education, because if what the experts are saying is that we really ought not to be eating animals, and here's why we ought not to be eating animals, and that we can't really do this in a way, not on a large-scale basis. I don't think it can be done on a small-scale basis either, but it certainly can't be done on a large-scale basis without inflicting suffering that would be tantamount to torture if humans were concerned. So therefore, if you care about this issue, then the answer is to stop eating them, not to purchase animals that are slightly less tortured. That strikes me as being sort of something that we should at least try. And given the response that I see, I wouldn't be putting my time and effort into it if I didn't think it was paying off, and it clearly is. So I don't know why you think that what I'm proposing is any less speculative. I mean, what you're proposing is basically the position of the entrenched organizations, which are making lots and lots of money off of doing what in essence is selling indulgences to people, and go forth and eat animals, and you can do it in a more humane way and in a more morally acceptable way. I think doesn't common sense tell you that that's exactly what people are going to do, and people are going to respond to that by saying, yeah, it's okay for me to consume?
Well, a number of points in response. First of all, I don't oppose vegan education campaigns, and I think it's an important strand in the work of the animal rights movement. But I'm highly skeptical that if you can't get a substantial number of people to entertain the idea of consuming welfare-friendly meat, which is the case, it still remains a very niche market. How are you going to get them then to agree not to consume animal products at all? I mean, my gut feeling is that the existence of more welfare-friendly meat won't make much difference to the demand for meat, actually. After all, there's been a massive expansion of meat consumption based, for the most part, on the factory farm industry. And this suggests that most people aren't that bothered about the origins of their food, sad though that is. And I don't think that... But
if that's true, then you can never expect any significant increase in welfare reform. You're going to be relegated to playing to a niche market one way or another.
Well, there's room for improvement, but it seems unlikely to me that people are going to jump from an interest in eating humanely produced meat to being vegetarians or vegans. I mean, I just don't think that there's this reservoir of people ready to convert to vegetarianism or veganism, or at least not enough to make a difference. It's really significant that despite the fact there's been an increase in the number of vegetarians in the since the 1970s, although as you say it might be declining now marginally, but that's coincided with a massive expansion of meat consumption. And this actually makes me think that what's needed is the role of political elites to introduce reforms which are going to make a difference to the lives of animals. I mean, I think it is significant that a lot of moral reforms that have been introduced, at least in the UK, have been first of all initiated by political elites, and then others, the general public, have been forced to follow. But it seems highly speculative to expect a vegan education to campaign, and my concern is that dismissing any attempt to try to influence animal welfare legislation would be the wrong step to take.
Well, I mean, but if what you say is correct, though, that most people don't really care about the origin of their food, then you can't really expect any significant change or improvement in animal welfare standards beyond production efficiency sorts of reforms, which are going to happen anyway, and in the absence of animal welfare campaigning, indeed may even happen faster, ironically. And certainly political elites, I mean, I would imagine the fastest way for a political elite to be voted out of office is to introduce things that the public really strongly, or the public doesn't care about, and where there really are no segments of the public, or no large segments of the public, that are in favor of it.
But on the other hand, the state has enormous power to try to influence public opinion.
Well, sure. I mean, sure, but I guess given that the state, I don't see the state as different from the corporate interests that shape the state and fund the state, and I realize that there are some differences, although they're decreasing actually, between our political systems. And I think the political systems of most nations in the world now are becoming very much shaped by corporate interests, and so we can't really sort of look at those political elites as different from the corporate interests that fund and shape them. So I'm not sure where we're going to go there. Let me just say this: I mean, I think there's a tremendous pool of people in my country and in your country, and we can worry about the rest of them down the line. But there's a tremendous pool of people, a very large number of people, who live with companion animals and who love animals. All of the people who get upset about Michael Vick and his dog fighting and things of that nature, those people are prime candidates for vegan education. And people who do have emotional attitudes and feelings about animals are prime targets for vegan education. And the number of times that I encounter these people and they say, oh, I really love animals, and and I buy only products that are approved by PETA or the Humane Society or the RSPCA or whatever, and I only buy animal compassionate or freedom food or humane raised, certified humane raised and handled, or whatever that label is that is promoted by the Humane Society here. The number of people I encounter who say this, and then when I explore it with them, they sort of look at me and they say, well, you mean this is not really different? And you say, no, here's a picture of a cage-free operation. Here's a picture of a conventional battery. Yeah, there are differences, but I mean, would you say that this is an acceptable situation? Well, no, I guess I wouldn't. And so, well, but I would, gee, I thought that, this organization would never, I mean, it's interesting. HSUS sued Purdue in New Jersey, because New Jersey has these consumer protection laws which are fairly strict, and HSUS sued Purdue, claiming that its statement that its chickens were produced humanely was deceiving to consumers, and HSUS is absolutely right to say that telling people that these animals have been humanely produced is problematic, because it conveys an understanding that most people would understand something different from that, from saying that these animals have been humanely produced. But then I would say also that the animals that are produced with labels that HSUS itself approves of are also tortured. They may be slightly less tortured than the Purdue animals, but then we end up with this battle of competing labels and who's torturing animals less. But I do think that there's a large group of people out there who could be educated. Is everybody in this group? And the answer is no. But no one is ever. You're never going to have a group where everybody's in the group. So there are going to be people who don't care one way or another. And to the extent that that group is large, then it's not clear to me how you're ever going to get any significant welfare reforms, let alone anything else. But if people don't care, then they're not going to care, and they're not going to care enough to want to pay a lot more money for significantly improved welfare standards either. So, that's why I say if we had a large group of people who thought that animals, that animals really were not things that we should eat or wear or use. If we had a large number of them, then we would at least have a political movement that might not be able to affect world veganism in short order, but certainly would provide a basis for moving animals away from the property paradigm and towards the personhood paradigm. As it stands right now, I don't see any really significant political action to affect that movement, and I think that movement is absolutely essential if we're ever going to really see any change. But I have a question to ask you. And that is, in the book you said you were a dietary vegan, and on one of these chat things or whatever, because I got all these emails. Did you say something different? Did you say you weren't a vegan?
No, what I said was that occasionally when eating out, it's difficult to guarantee that you're eating vegan food. But certainly the food I consume at home is 100% vegan. You were getting lots of emails about that, really.
Yes. I don't know. It was on one of these chat things, and you said something about. I think you said something about or at least I think you said something about eating cheese, because people were cutting and pasting and sending these things to me, and they were saying that you ate cheese, and I said, well, in the book he says he's a dietary vegan. And which I took to mean that he doesn't eat animal products, but he may have a pair of leather shoes or something, or wool, or no, you didn't wear leather. But I said I took that to mean that he may wear a wool a sweater or something. But I didn't understand that he consumed animal products. And I said, oh yes, he says he eats cheese. So I just thought I'd ask you.
No, it's not exactly what I said.
This is your chance to clarify it.
Yes. I can describe myself as 100% a dietary vegan at home, but you can never guarantee that if you're eating out anywhere, that the stuff you get is 100% vegan.
Yeah, well, I mean that's true. I actually have stopped and have for a while stopped eating anything cooked in a non-vegan restaurant. I even stay away from non-vegan restaurants, but if I find myself in one, I will only eat something like a salad and put oil and vinegar on it, which is brought to me at the table, nothing which is mixed, because I don't want. I am aware that restaurants can be notorious. But anyway, all right. Well, I want to thank you. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No. I think we've covered most of the bases.
Well, I want to thank you so terribly much for spending this time with me, and I enjoyed writing the book with you. I thought it was a really a good opportunity for two people who didn't who agreed on a lot, but didn't agree on the sorts of things that really sort of are splitting the animal movement right now. The question about what do we do in terms of should we pursue abolition? Should we pursue regulation? Does regulation work? What about all these campaigns and things? And most people I find just really can't discuss these things in there's very little civil discourse about these issues. And I enjoyed writing the book with you because I thought it was not only civil discourse, but it was fun. It was a good exercise, and I enjoyed it. And
it's possible to. It's only really possible to fully challenge your own position when you're faced with someone who's arguing very different things. And it's,
Exactly. And also, I want to, it's a shame that you're not here or I'm not there, because I can tell you that I've gotten a number of inquiries of people who want to have us both on, and I've actually talked with Columbia about that, because it becomes difficult, because we both have. We're both. You teach, I teach, and there's a 5-hour time difference, and it becomes very difficult to try to coordinate these things. And I got an invitation to do a television thing not long ago, and I said, well, that's going to be rather hard, because I'm here, he's there. So I'm sorry about that, but we will, I'm sure, be doing some joint interview things in the spring. But thank you so much, Robert. Robert Garner, professor of politics at the University of Leicester in the United Kingdom, and co-author of the Animal Rights Debate, Abolition or Regulation, published by Columbia University Press. And thank you, Robert, very, very much. I very much appreciate your time, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
All right, well, that wraps up commentary number 23, the interview with Professor Garner on our book, The Animal Rights Debate, Abolition or Regulation. Thank you very much for listening. If you are not vegan, go vegan. It's incredibly easy. It's the easiest thing you'll ever do. It's better for your health. It's better for the health of the planet. And most important, it's the morally right thing to do. Thank you very much for listening.